Okay, last time we were discussing about primary data. So primary data you have to collect personally or through a team of surveyor. Now in the primary data, we have a population and you can get the data for the entire population that it will become a census. But last time we discussed that census is difficult to collect because it is time consuming and costly. Then we go for a sample, and the sample is a subset of population. So in a sample, we collect for a small number of uh, group of population. Okay, now then the question is how to get this sample. So we have different sampling techniques, and these are the basic sampling classification. So we can use a non-probability sampling technique, or we can use probability sampling techniques. So in the probability sampling techniques, we have simple random sampling, we have systematic sampling, stratified sampling, and cluster sampling, and some other sampling. Then in the non-probability sampling techniques, we have convenience sampling, we have judgmental sampling, we have quota sampling, and we have snowball sampling. Okay, so using these type of sampling techniques, we can collect the sample, and that sample would be a true representative of population. Okay. Now in the probability sampling, the first one is the random sampling. So in a random sampling, the sample units are selected randomly. Okay. So we don't make any choice. We just select the sample unit randomly. For example, if you have to get the data from the university student and you have to select the university student, then we can use the ID of university student, and then we can draw the samples. Same is with the firm. If you have to get the data of the employees of the firm, then we can use the employee ID number, and then we can select these ID first, and then we can approach the employees for which we have collected the ID number, and then we can get the data. Same is with the taxpayer. We have national tax number, and using national tax number, we can draw the samples and then approach the taxpayer for the responses on our questionnaire. Okay. So these number, we can pick randomly to get our samples. And this method could be costly and time consuming if the sample units are scattered in a wide geographical area, because we will first select the sample unit based on the ID or employee number or tax number, and then we have to locate those uh, sample units. Maybe they are scattered. If the geographical area is wide, then it would be time consuming and costly. Then the second poverty sampling technique is the systematic sampling. So in this case, a random starting point is chosen, and then every ith element is picked from the population. Okay, so if we divide the population size n by the sample size small n, then we will get the sampling interval, which is called I, and then we can round it to the nearest integer. Then we can get the samples using systematic sampling techniques. For example, if there are 100,000 elements in the population and we have to get the sample of 1,000 units, and then what we will do, we will divide this. This is now capital N, this is a small n, so this is divided by this, so we will get 100. So now sampling interval is 100. For systematic sampling, so first we have to decide the starting number. Okay, suppose our starting number is 45. So then taking the interval of 100. So first element would be 45, and second would be 145, 245, 345, 445, and so on. So in this case, we get the data from the sample units for our sample, and this is the systematic sampling. Then next is stratified sampling. So in a stratified sampling, we first divide the population into homogeneous groups or strata, okay, and then we get the data using the simple random sampling. For example, our data in our population, we have male and female. So male would be one homogeneous group and female would be another homogeneous group. So first we will divide the population into these two homogeneous groups, and then using the simple random sampling we can get the data. So it would be stratified sampling. And there could be other strata, like we can make the age group or we can make the income group. Okay, so for such groups, so each group would be a strata, and then we can get data from each group using simple random sampling. Now in economics, consumer price index and the estimates of unemployment rates are a good example of this stratified sampling. Then we have cluster sampling. So in a cluster sampling, we first divide the population into several smaller non-overlapping areas, which are called cluster. So first, we will divide the population into clusters. Okay, then we have to select some cluster randomly. Okay, and then from these cluster, we have to get the sample units. Okay, so this means we have a population, and then we have to divide the entire population into clusters. Okay, non-overlapping clusters. Like we have to get the data from Karachi city. So then we can divide the this city into, suppose, districts. So we have district east, west, north, south, central, like this, and then we can select some district, and from those district we can get the sample units, and then further maybe we can divide into UCs. Okay, and then we can select UCs, union councils, and then from union council we have to get the data. So each union council would be a cluster. Okay, then the example cluster sampling is basically useful for political polling, okay, and vaccination survey and crime survey. So normally for such type of studies, cluster sampling is used. Then we have convenience sampling in the non-priority sampling. In this case, we select the sample units according to our convenience. Okay, and so the researcher includes the most convenient cases in the samples, the other cases. And the well-known example of convenience sampling is the opinion survey. You can see that the media reporters, they just walk in the street and they get the opinions of the people. So this would be a convenience sampling. And in the non-priority sampling, we have judgmental sampling. So in judgmental sampling, the sample units are selected based on the judgment of the researcher. So researcher will decide, okay, which sample unit would be interviewed and data would be obtained from that sample units. So this is purely based on the judgment, and the researcher use their logic or common sense to decide which sample units would be included from the population. And in the non-probability sampling, we have quota sampling. So in quota sampling, this is two-stage judgmental sampling. So in the first stage, the population is divided into control categories or quota, such as age and sex, and social class or ethnicity. Then in the second stage, the sample elements are selected based on convenience or judgment. So here again, you see here we are selecting the samples based on our judgment or convenience. Okay, but in that case, when there was a probability sampling where we have the uh, stratified sampling, in that case we were using the random sampling to select the sample units. But here in the quota sampling, we are using our judgment or convenience. Okay. For example, if we want to get the quota sampling, so first we have to look at for the firm. If we want to get the data from the employees of the firm, so we have to first look at the ratio of employees of male and female. So if the 75% are male and 25% are female, then we have to maintain this ratio in our sample. Okay. Then in the non-probability sampling technique, we have snowball sampling. So in snowball sampling, initial respondent is first selected. Okay. Then from this respondent, we get information for the other sample units that belong to that population. Okay. So the important thing is, first of all, we have to identify who is the most relevant respondent for our sample from the population, and then with the help of that initial respondent, we get information for other sample units, and we get the response of other sample units. So this snowball sampling is used when we have difficulties in getting the uh, respondent, okay, sample units, because there are some studies where it is difficult to identify the respondent. For example, if we have a study to see the lifestyle of corrupt people, so to identify the corrupt people, it's very difficult. No? Then first we have to find out uh, initial corrupt person, and then with the help of that corrupt person we can locate the other. Same is with the drug users. So first we have to identify the drug user, and then with the help of that drug user we can identify the other drug users, because they belong to the same community. Then we have secondary data. So secondary data is the data which is already available in published form for the researcher. So here you don't need to collect the data personally or through a team of surveyor. Here the data is already collected by some institution, government, or some organization, and they published it, or that data is available on their website or in some document, and then you can use that published farm data for your research. So that data is secondary data, just like you used Pakistan Economic Survey. So there is a data related to Pakistan economy, in the Pakistan Economic Survey. So that data is secondary data because government collected that data and that is available in published form. The annual report of the State Bank is also published data. We have international financial statistics by IMF. That is also published data. World Development Report, okay, that is also a published data. World Development Indicator, all these are published data. So we use such data. And government is considered as the most important source of this secondary data. And there are some also local and regional and international organizations that publish such data. And the advantages of the secondary data are that it may require less time and less money to locate it because that is readily available. So we can immediately get such data, and also in some cases we don't have to pay. Most of the secondary data are available free of cost. Okay. In some cases, they charge for the use of the secondary data, but in most of the cases, it is available free of cost. And another advantage of the secondary data is if we have to conduct longitudinal studies, okay, then we can get the secondary data, okay, time series data, and that time series data can be used for longitudinal studies. But the disadvantages are also there for secondary data because the data have been collected for a specific purpose, and there is a possibility that that purpose does not match with your purpose. So in that case, there would be a difficulty in using secondary data. And the secondary data they are mostly aggregated form. Okay, but if you have a study in which you need data in disaggregated form, so in that case it will not be very useful. But then you have to go for primary data and get the data by yourself. And secondary data, they are likely to be less current. But if it is a primary data, that would be most current data. No? In case of secondary data, maybe there is a lag of few months or some year. Just like international data, if you want to get international data, there is a lag of 1 or 2 years. You cannot get latest data international in published form. Same with the national data, there is a lag of some month. So this is the disadvantage. So they are not, most recent. Then in the secondary data, we have time series data. Okay, this is the data type which are collected after some time, and this data could be daily, it could be weekly, monthly, quarterly, yearly. So for example, we have daily data of COVID-19 cases. You can see that every day it is said that for the last 24 hours, this is the number of new COVID cases. There could also be a daily data of COVID deaths, okay, and COVID recovery. And also we have the daily data for stock prices, we have gold prices, international oil prices, okay. And we have weekly data for commodity prices, we have monthly data for money supply, we have quarterly data for GDP, and we also have the annual data for GDP. In some countries, there is a quarterly data for GDP, and we have yearly data for national budget. And quinquennially data is for 5 years, and that is the census of agriculture, and then sometime we have census of manufacturing industries, okay. And then we also have the census of population, which is collected normally after every 10 years. Then time series data, they are very important to see the trend of the variable. So if we plot the time series data, we will know about the trend, and then we can see the past trend, and then we can guess something about the future trend. Just like when there was emergence of corona cases. So we were looking to the graph, okay, and we were waiting when it will turn down, okay, bend, when it will bend, okay, downward trend. So then we saw that after reaching to a peak, then it started to decrease. So there was a dent in the curve, and then it reached to the lowest point, and then in the second wave again it has a rising trend, and then now again we are waiting when it will reach to its peak and then will come down. Okay, so if we plot this daily data, so then for the country or for a region or for the world, we will know the past trend, and then we can guess something about future. Same is with the gold prices. If we plot the gold prices, you will see that there is a rising trend of gold prices for the last few months, and then now there is a declining trend. So this is the example of time series data. So we have population, we have implied labor force, we have nominal exchange rate. Okay, so this is for Pakistan. You can see that from 2013 to 2017, this is the population figure, implied labor force, and nominal exchange rate. Complete data is available in the time series data file. Then we have cross-section data. This is the type of data which are collected at some point in time. Okay, and the example of cross-section data are the family expenditures on various commodities and population data and the temperature data of different cities. So if I get the temperature data of different cities of Pakistan, that would be a cross-section data. Okay, and if I get the GDP of different countries for 2020, it would be a cross-section data. If I get population of different countries for 2015, so it would be a cross-section data. So this type of cross-section data are widely used in economics and other social sciences research studies. This is a cross-section data. This is a country, and for 2010, for this country, we have population, we have GDP, we have external debt. Okay, so it will be a cross-section data. So same data. This is also cross-section data. For different countries, we have data for population. For the same country, we have data for different variables. So it is a cross-sectional data. Then we have pooled panel data. So if we combine the cross-section and time series, that would be a pooled data. Okay. For example, we have the GDP and population or inflation, FDI, gross domestic saving data for 5 countries for 2010, and for other 8 countries and the same variable for 2015. It would be considered as a pooled data. Okay. Now, if the data set contains observation from the same cross-sectional unit, for example, countries or firm, over time, such data is called panel data. And if each cross-sectional unit has this same time period, such panel data is called balanced panel. And otherwise, if the time period is different for the cross sections, then it will be unbalanced panel. Now, the advanced I will show you here. This is the example of panel data. So here we have years. Okay, for country 1, this is data for population. So 2010 to 2013, we have for country 1, this is the population. For country 2, this is population data from 2010 to 2013. Now you can see that year is same, 2010 to 2013, again 2010 to 2013. So this is a balanced panel data, and because now it is time series as well as the cross section. Okay, so that's why it is a panel data and pool data also. And there is advantage of using a pool or panel data, because if you have only time series data, maybe your sample size is small. But if you merge it and make it a pool data or panel data, then you have a larger number of observation, and then you have a bigger data compared to if you are using only one country time series data. That's why we use the panel data or pool data. In that case, we have a bigger sample size, and we know that if we are using a bigger sample size, then we will get a better result compared to if our sample size is small. So I will stop here, and from next class I will discuss the statistical analysis